YouTube! Welcome back to my Random Thoughts on Thursdays, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about how I managed to get myself in and finally out of debt. So with some of my past videos, you've seen that we've been doing some remodeling on our house and that we recently got married and all sorts of things like that. And some of you may wonder, how do we pay for all of that? How do we afford all of that without going into massive loads of debt and everything else? And I want to say that we are, my husband and I, actually living basically debt-free right now. And I didn't always live debt-free. I used to have massive credit card debt. And I want to talk a little bit about how I got into that, and then how I managed to get out of it, and maybe share a few tips for those of you who are struggling with that as well. So, long story short, my family was rather poor when I was growing up. Sometimes my mom would have work, sometimes she didn't. Most of the time we lived off of my grandparents' Social Security money, so we didn't have a lot of money. And my family wasn't the best example in terms of how to handle money. Anytime we actually had a little bit more money in the house, we would go out and splurge and buy steak and eat really well and buy nice things instead of continuing to live frugally and putting some of that money away for a rainy day. So that was definitely a bad influence in terms of how I managed money. When I got to college, thankfully I was able to get a Pell Grant and a Stafford Grant to help me pay for college, because my family had no money to put me in college, but I really wanted to go to college and really wanted to do something better with my life. So I got to college, and first semester out, and I got credit cards thrown at me. And I was like, ooh, free money, and ooh, only $10 a month to pay it back, yes! So I got myself fooled into that whole credit card cycle where at my high point, that time around, I think I had about $25,000 in credit card debt. And a lot of it was just going out to eat, buying groceries for my family. I mean, it was actually necessities. It wasn't just splurging on shoes or anything like that. But at the end of the day, it was still the wrong thing to do. And with the help of the boyfriend that I had at the time, he didn't give me money, but he gave me the support that I needed, and made me accountable for my money, so that I would pay off my debt, and I managed to get it all paid off. And then that relationship unfortunately ended. Mutual reasons just didn't work out. But I then fell back into the same credit card problem I had in the past. And for me, the spending is a very emotional thing. From an intellectual standpoint, I was like, okay, don't spend more than I earn, only buy what I know I can pay off at the end of the month, etc. From an intellectual standpoint, I understand that. From an emotional standpoint, I was like, but I really want those boots, or I really want, you know, at the time I was actually moving into an apartment, and I had nothing. I mean, I had books and clothes and a couch. And that's it. I didn't have a TV, I didn't have dishes, I had nothing when the relationship ended. So it started small. It started with me just like, okay, well, I need plates to eat off of, I need pots to cook in. So it started innocently enough. But then it escalated to going on trips to Chicago or whatnot and getting like the $300 a night room when I should have been getting the $50 a night room. That type of thing. And I ended up with another $27,000 in credit card debt pretty quickly. And then I had to go to the hospital, I had to have surgery, I wasn't getting the raises I was expecting that I was going to use to pay off the credit cards, and it just kind of spiraled and snowballed. And at that point, I ended up having to use CCCS, which is Credit Counseling Services, through United Way. And they're the only ones that I know of that are a legit organization that really will help you with your credit card debt. They were really great. They ended up negotiating lower interest rates for me, and I ended up paying them the money, and they paid off the credit cards for me. I only had one payment to make every month, so emotionally it was easier to do. So I ended up getting myself out of that debt. And as I was coming out of that, because I had to deprive myself for about 6 years to pay all that off, I started the cycle again. Thankfully, I didn't get as bad. That one ended up only being about $13,000. And that's around the time I met my husband. And once again, he gave me the emotional shoulder that I needed and the accountability. I needed someone to make me accountable for my spending. And that helped me stop the spending and pay off the debt. And I have now been about 3 or 4 years now completely debt-free, with the small occasion where I'll put something on a credit card. I do all my business expenses through an American Express credit card. I do pay those off right away, within the same month, if not within 2 or 3 months at the most. And I never hold more than, I think $3,000 is the most debt I've held on that card. And it's not easy to get there. I'm the first to admit it. From an emotional standpoint, it's very difficult. It helps me to have someone in my life who holds me accountable for my spending. So I can actually go to my husband and say, and I don't go and ask him for permission. I have my own income. I earn a good salary. It's not a salary, but I earn a good income from the work that I do as an independent consultant. And so I can afford to buy things. But I need to have that someone hold me accountable so that I don't go off and make a crazy $5,000 purchase on something that I don't really need. So real quick, here are a couple of tips if you are currently struggling with your credit cards. Number one, look at all the credit cards that you have. List them out, like put them on a spreadsheet or write them down on paper and list them out in order of the interest rate that you're paying on the credit cards. Take a look at which one has the highest interest rate, and that's the one you're going to want to pay off first, because you're paying more in interest on that one than what you purchased with it than on any of the other cards. And so that's the way you do it, is you prioritize them based on the interest rate that you're paying, highest one first, pay all of the other ones at the minimum rate that they need to be paid at every month, and then the highest one, try and pay a little bit more. You know, if you can only afford $5, throw an extra $5 at it. If you can pay double, pay double. Do that until that one is completely paid off. And needless to say, you want to stop spending, or at least try and really cut back on your spending as much as you possibly can while you're trying to pay these off. Only use the cards when it's absolutely necessary. Not because you see a cute pair of shoes or, you know, the latest, hottest tool wrench out there if you're a guy, or whatever it is, you know, new speakers or something. Hold off on the want spending and only use them on the need spending, and only if you honestly don't have the money in the bank and you know what, you really need to get a new coat for the winter because you don't have one. Okay, if you don't have the cash to pay for it now, go ahead and buy the coat. Although try and get a good warm coat that is less expensive than something that's the latest hot fashion style. It's better to be warm than fashionable, in my opinion. So you kind of have to make some compromises, you have to make some sacrifices if you really want to get out of debt, but you want to pay off the highest interest rate one first. Another strategy you can do is you can always call the credit card companies and try to negotiate a lower interest rate. Some of the credit card companies will be willing to do that, some won't. Right now the credit card companies are a little less open to that from my understanding, but it doesn't hurt to call them and try and talk to them about it. Another thing to do is, let's say you have a habit of buying Starbucks every day. I know Starbucks is delicious. I know that they're, you know, it's an addicting habit. But one of the things I learned through CCCS was, you know what, while you're trying to get out of debt, Starbucks is off limits. Get a coffee maker, buy some Coffee Mate with the fancy flavors in it. They make pumpkin spice Coffee Mate now, and holiday spices, and you could add eggnog to your coffee or whatnot, just like Starbucks. You know, just brew it at home, and it's, instead of spending $5 on your latte, you can spend pennies. You know, one big container of ground coffee can cost $10, and you can make hundreds of cups of coffee with it. So really, it's just common sense. So something like Starbucks, and that's just an example. I mean, you might have some other type of habit that is expensive, that you don't realize adds up. Another thing you can do is sit down and just kind of write down, take a list of how much you spend. And if you have no idea how much you're spending every day, write it down. Go for a week and say, okay, I spent this much on my Starbucks, I spent this much on lunch, I spent this much on dinner, I went out for drinks with friends, etc., etc., etc. Keep a running list, add it all up, and see how much you're spending, and take a look at areas where you can cut back. You know, when you go out drinking with friends and you have 3 martinis, maybe only have 2. Save that extra $9 or however much it costs you to get a martini. Instead of going out with your buddies and drinking beer, buy a 12-pack and have your buddies come over and watch the game at home or something, if you're able to. But there's all sorts of things like that where you can continue to socialize and you can continue to be with your friends, but just kind of cut back on where you're spending the most, especially in areas where it's more of a want than a need. Obviously, you still need groceries. You still want to eat healthy. You don't want to have to live on ramen noodles. That's not healthy. So these are just some basic tips on how to try and help dig yourself out of debt. If you have any questions in terms of where you're at with your finances and you'd like me to answer them, I'm no expert. I don't claim to be an expert. I've been there before. I've gotten myself out of it, and I might be able to guide you at least towards some place where you can get really good advice if I don't have the advice myself to give. So anyway, if you do have questions, leave a comment below, the video response, etc. I'd be more than happy to respond. And if you like these kind of videos, please hit subscribe above. I'd really appreciate it. Until next time, thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.